And we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name, for those of you who don't know, who are seeing us on some other page, my name is Joe Kimok. I am a candidate for state attorney here in Broward County, running on a progressive decarceral campaign to dismantle mass incarceration and build a new criminal justice system that works for everyone. Part of that campaign is talking with everyone in Broward County who is touched by the criminal justice system somehow, or is an expert in the criminal justice somehow, or is going to live with our criminal justice system for the next few decades to come. And so as part of that kind of discussion, I'm really kind of honored and privileged to be here with Logan Rubenstein today. Logan is a gun violence prevention advocate and a current sophomore at Stoneman Douglas High School. After the Parkland shooting, Logan got involved with the organization March for Our Lives and has been a community organizer ever since. And so we thought that we would have a discussion here about gun violence here in Broward County. Obviously, gun violence is an extraordinary, important topic. It touches all of our lives, but the solutions to it, especially when it intersects with the justice system, is extraordinarily complicated. And anybody that tells you that there's an easy fix to gun violence is lying to you, because there's nothing easy about it. But we have never had a real leader here in Broward County, an elected official who has taken a leadership role to bring all of the stakeholders together to try to get that done. And so I'm going to have this conversation. I'm going to have many more conversations, both before the election and after the election. So for those of you who are watching, thank you for watching. Please share this on your social media platforms. We know that the best way to change hearts and minds about what's going on in our system is to spread folk stories and spread folks' expertise. And Logan, with his position with March for Our Lives, is very much an expert in gun violence and what it will take to start preventing it. And so, Logan, thank you so much for being with me. The structure for this interview is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to ask Logan a couple of questions, and then Logan is actually going to flip it and ask me a couple of questions. If you are watching and you have questions, please type them in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them. So Logan, you are a sophomore at MSD now. We all who were in Broward County at the time know exactly where we were when we found out about the shooting there 2 years ago. What was your experience?
So I actually wasn't at Douglas at the time. I was at in 8th grade at middle school, and I remember during the shooting, we were actually in lockdown because I was about a mile away at the middle school. And so, having being in the corner and having to, watch CNN on my phone and try to understand what exactly was happening. And, being out after a couple hours and seeing an FBI command center, in the local Publix shopping center, it definitely touched me in a way, seeing you see it on the news, like Sandy Hook and Columbine and stuff, and you think you have an understanding, but when it actually happens to you, it being affected by gun violence is deeply personal. And so ever since then, I've gotten involved, and I've organized an issue to make sure that gun violence, that no more person or community or family has to go through the effects of gun violence and actually have to grieve from losing someone they know.
So talk to us about your journey. You go through that experience. Now you're in a leadership role with March for Our Lives. How did that kind of progression take place?
I actually I wasn't involved from the beginning. I was only like 13 years old, like as a little middle schooler at the beginning. But a couple months after, I was when the Parkland chapter of March for Lives got set up, and so I became a member and I started going to meetings, and I kind of like worked my way up. I became the co-director, and then the executive director once the person left, and then I applied for a position on the state board as the deputy advocacy director of March for Lives Florida. And so with those positions, as the executive director of Parkland, getting involved in the community, hosting voter registration drives, getting out the vote and getting out the, information about the August 18th primaries, which of course matter, getting young people involved in the political process, and then also advocating on the state level to, advocate for some gun legislation to save lives in the state of Florida. And so, yeah, I got involved a couple months after the shooting. I must say like September or so. I'm not sure exactly. But it's just that deep commitment to end gun violence got me involved.
So where does the fight stand right now? What are activists pushing for? And have we made any progress? Do you see any progress on the horizon? Where are we right now?
Ever since the shooting, there's been, I want to say, over 57 state laws or states have passed gun laws around the country, from conservative, even states like Florida, who haven't passed gun laws in over 20 years before the shooting. We even passed comprehensive gun laws, such as raising the minimum age to buy a firearm to 21, ending the sale of bump stocks. That had never been done in Florida before, and it was because of the activism and the advocacy of students after March for Our Lives, and the kind of explosion of students getting involved, which pushed legislators to act for the first time in so many years. We've seen so much gun violence rampant in across America, but it's the activism that pushed people and legislators to finally act. And so we're not done yet. Even though we got one law passed in Florida, even though we've passed gun laws across the country in different states, we still need on the federal level. And even that, it's not just passing gun control or passing background checks. It's also passing violence intervention funding and mental health resources and stuff that actually not just prevent people getting a gun, but also helping them address the roots of violence in America, and also the roots of violence in Broward County. And also it's also the justice system. Making sure that there's holistic and equity justice in the justice system, and making sure that our courts, criminalize mental health and the right ways, and making sure that we don't just criminalize people for very low stuff. And so that's also the fight to end gun violence, and it's also fighting the roots of violence. So yeah.
So that obviously that is an extraordinary kind of task ahead. What, like, logistically, March for Our Lives it was founded by students, right? Y'all are made up of students. What is it that you're doing in order to try to push for this change?
Our powers and numbers. So it's getting involved, either driving up to Tallahassee and busing 100 kids up to Tallahassee, and lobbying our representatives to end gun violence, or also having online petitions and calls for legislators to act. It's also voting. It's getting young people to vote and to elect representatives who will actually care about the issue and support gun sense legislation. And so right now, with COVID, it's definitely been very tricky to organize. We've been hosting online seminars with representatives. We've been holding Zoom sessions for spaces for people to just calm down, relax, and have a space to talk. And also just keeping the fight up and never backing down on our tasks.
How do you respond to folks who say, look, any type of restrictions that you are trying to place on my ability to get a gun violates the Second Amendment, right in the Constitution. What is y'all's response to that?
I mean, they're just flat out wrong. The legislation that March for Lives and that I support will not take away your right to own a firearm. But it just makes it, making sure that the right people own a firearm, and to make sure that if people have a firearm and are mentally unstable, or if they're going through a hard time or whatever, or they feel like they have to act on violence, to providing those resources and the funding to make sure that they don't, and to stop that violence and to stop at the roots of violence. But I would just say, like, right now we're not focusing on that. I guess, like, they can have their opinions all they want, but we're going to keep our activism. We're going to keep fighting and like pushing for radical change that'll end gun violence. And so, yeah.
So I've got a question coming in from the chat, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. What would you say are your priorities, right? And if you had to pick 2 or 3 laws that we could get passed right away, what would those be, and specifically how would the reduce gun violence in our state?
So I know we all talk about like background checks and assault rifle bans, but actually my number one priority, or my top 3, would be gun licensing, large capacity magazine bans, and then also just funding for studying gun violence. And so gun licensing, if you have you have to have a license to drive a car, to get married, to literally basically every single thing you have to have a license for. And so right now in America, federally, you do not have to have a license to own a gun. You can buy a weapon of war. You can buy a weapon that can, do very violent stuff, and you don't have to have the training or the license to have that. And so I think that personally, that is my number one priority, having gun licensing and making sure that if you have a gun, you can, one, have it taken away if you do something wrong, and then making sure that the right people have guns. And then also large capacity magazine bans, making sure that the rounds are less than 10, I think it's like 10 bullets in each round, which in the cases of mass shootings and instances like that, it heavily decreases the amount of the successfulness and the death rates in those instances. And also, it's not as, I guess, controversial as an assault rifle ban. Obviously that's important, but it's a lot more like rational, I would say. And also, obviously, funding to study gun rounds. Right now, actually not right now, but for the past 25 years, Congress and the federal government has not been able to study gun rounds. There's a law passed in the 90s that made it so that there cannot be federal funding directed towards research for gun rounds. And so the last Congress passed a law that included $25 million to study gun rounds, but that's still not enough. We still need to know a lot more about the roots of violence and the roots and, how to solve the issue. So it's still, those are my top 3 priorities for me personally.
Okay. Before I turn it over to you to kind of flip it here, if someone wanted to get involved, whether they're an adult or a student, what would you recommend that they do?
I mean, so if you're a student, I'm just going to plug the website, marchforlives.com. You can go there, start a chapter, join a chapter, get involved in your community. If you're an adult, vote for gun sense. Vote for gun sense candidates. Spare a few dollars to March for Lives to support our work. And then stand in solidarity with students. If you want to, if you strongly support ending gun violence, support your local chapter in any way you can. Get involved, and just honestly, like, everyone is welcome to the plate. We can use all the hands we can help, or all the help we can get. Because to have gun licensing on all these legislation passed, we need a lot of people, and you need to make your voices heard, and we can't do that without everyone. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Logan. Marchforourlives.com. If you're watching, go check it out. Sign up to help out. Now we're going to go ahead and flip it, and Logan is going to ask me some questions, I guess also about gun violence. So go ahead, Logan.
Yeah. So when I did a little bit of my research, it wasn't clear exactly what a state attorney can do and their powers to end gun violence in their communities. And so I just want to start off, what exactly, like as state attorney, would you do? And what is the powers a state attorney can do to end gun violence in Broward County?
Yeah. So that is a very long answer to that question. There's a very limited view and a very kind of the view that I hold. The limited view is that the state attorney can't do anything, that he or she charges whoever comes in and charges them with whatever minimum mandatory, and it's all after the fact, right? That has been the traditional view of what a state attorney does for decades, is that they don't get involved in crime prevention. They just hold folks accountable once they've committed crime. We have to completely flip that. And I think that we have to start thinking about violence, not just as, not just gun violence, but as a symptom of violence as a whole, right? And it's something that you were talking about earlier, is kind of a holistic view. And so there are a number of different things that the state attorney can take leadership roles in order to make that happen. One is, first is to recognize the problem, right? Gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black men and boys between 15 and 24. In fact, more 15 and 24-year-old Black men and boys die from gun violence than all other causes of death combined. And so this is a plague that is particularly hitting our Black communities. And it is very much a reflection of our criminal justice priorities, right? Today, more people are arrested for possessing marijuana during the course of a year than are arrested for all other violent crimes combined. Our solving rates of violent crimes is often less than 20% for crimes like robbery, burglary, things like that. And so what we have, but we have an extraordinary amount of policing, right? So we have a situation in many communities where we have over policing, but under protection. So folks that are living in communities don't have a trust of police. They have a very much a distrust of police, because there is this view that police are warriors out fighting lawbreakers, as opposed to guardians and partners protecting community well-being. And that's because that's what they have been traditionally for a very long time. So what we very much need to do is rethink how we if we want to actually reduce all crime, not just gun crime, but all crime, we have to rethink how we think about policing. And obviously today is day after everything blew up in Minneapolis with the George Floyd situation. And really that's just a perfect example. I mean, he was treated less than because of the color of his skin. And when that happens, you just have this profound distrust of the community of police. And so, one, we kind of need to reframe the way that we think about policing if we really want to prevent gun violence. Two, we have to prioritize violent crime, right? Prioritize solving violent crime, as opposed to all of this over criminalization of picking up folks with marijuana and other drugs and stuff like that. And once we get to that point, then we can get to three, where police and communities work together to reduce and prevent violent crime. right? Where community stakeholders trust police enough to be able to work with them to get guns off of our streets. Because right now, most folks in the community justifiably are not willing to work with police to help get guns off their streets because of their distrust of police. So that's kind of the first half, and it's very much working to reframe the way we think about policing in our neighborhoods. From a state attorney perspective, there are a number of very specific things the state attorney can do. One is we've got to build restorative justice into our court system. So right now, we know that the vast majority of people that hurt people were hurt themselves, that they were victims of violent crime themselves, or they suffered from some sort of mental illness themselves. None of that is being treated by our system, right? And so restorative justice, by implementing restorative justice into our courts and decision making, we not only make victims of crime whole, right? But we address the underlying causes of the violence and break that cycle once and for all. I read a study a couple of weeks ago where they asked a whole bunch of victims of violent crime, what do you prefer? Would you prefer this person go to prison for several years? Or would you prefer that this person go through a restorative justice program where you are made whole and they are given the underlying cause of the crime is addressed, and 70% of victims of violent crime believed in a restorative justice approach because they know that prison isn't solving those problems, right? Mental health, our mental health system is very much broken. It's just it's a revolving door. We're picking up folks off the street for incidents in which they should be treated by professionals instead of in a jail, and that sending folks to jail only makes folks sicker. The red flag laws are great. They enable us to get guns out of the hands of both folks that are going through mental kind of breaks, as well as domestic violence situations where folks are posing a threat to the community. I very much believe that we can expand that from the state attorney's office. We can expand that. So in Hillsborough County, the state attorney there require anybody that is pleading to a domestic violence case, he requires them to give up their guns in order to do that. And that is not otherwise required because usually most domestic violence cases are misdemeanors. And I think that we can really dramatically expand that, right? And so if you want to avoid a conviction and go through our our diversion program that we've set up, you've got to give up your guns in order to do that. We have also seen extraordinary success with a specialty gun court. So in Brooklyn, we don't have that here in Broward County, but in Brooklyn, they set up a gun court, kind of like drug court or mental health court, but it's specifically for folks that are arrested for gun crimes. And it allows the stakeholders to get really creative in again, addressing the underlying cause of whatever that gun crime was. And they have seen significantly reduced recidivism rates for folks that were able to go through the program. Right now, all we're doing is slapping folks with a huge minimum mandatory, pushing the case through the system and pushing them out either into prison or back on the streets, doing nothing to actually address the underlying cause of the crime. And I think that's the biggest takeaway is our system is very, very good at punishment, but not very good at actually addressing the underlying causes.
Mm-hmm.
I represent, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I represent folks charged with gun crimes. Now, in the vast majority of my shooting cases, it is usually two individuals who get into what should be a fist fight, and they're fighting over something stupid, a basketball game, a significant other, somebody said something. It should be a fist fight, but because one or both of them has a gun, somebody ends up getting shot, sometimes killed, and the other person's life, is also ruined. And so, there are extraordinary challenges ahead. It is not an easy fix, but it's one that we've got to have somebody that's willing to step up and do it. So I told you it was a long answer, but there you go.
Yeah, I also want to touch on the school to prison pipeline. The increased amount of SRO officers in schools, and also the increased relying to arrest kids in schools, that further incentivizes the cycle of violence, and also some people believe it can also correlate with school shootings and gun violence. So as state attorney, what would you do to take on the school to prison pipeline in our schools?
Yeah. And what you're talking about is really unfortunate. So like about 8 or 9 years ago, Broward County was the leader in the nation in arresting kids out of schools. We made progress, and we were arresting kids for everything. We were arresting kids for throwing spitballs at people, for throwing a pen at another person, for bringing weed to school. And so the stakeholders got together and they developed the Promise program. They built in some more diversion, and we saw a reduction. It wasn't enough, but we saw a reduction. And then Parkland hit, and a lot of people blamed this increased desire to give kids a second chance on Parkland. Anybody who's even remotely looked at the facts of the case knows that the Promise program and diversion for kids had nothing to do with what happened at Parkland, but it has been very much used as an excuse to kind of roll back some of those changes. And last year, we saw a 30% increase in arrests of kids out of schools, over 30% of which were for drug crimes. And so we know that the second we put handcuffs on a kids, it makes them more likely or less likely to graduate high school. If they spend even one night in a detention center, that is an extraordinary trauma and makes them more likely to recidivate as adults. And so we have to invest heavily in keeping kids out of our criminal justice system, and instead empowering our schools and our communities to address these underlying causes themselves. It means making diversion the rule, not the exception. It means being really, really strategic and targeted in developing programs that are individualized to each kid to help the kid break out of the cycle of crime that they're in. It's not easy, again, but if we really want to build a system that keeps our kids safe, A, and B, keeps all of us safe 5 years from now, breaking that school to prison pipeline is imperative.
Yeah, definitely. And then one last thing, and I think that's pretty much it. And in recent years with technology and 3D printing, there's been a surge across the country with ghost guns, which means that people can print guns at their own home with either 3D printers or either making kits with guns. And what this means is that these guns that people make at their own homes don't have a serial number. Sorry, I forgot the word. and then they also cannot be traced by law enforcement. And so, as state attorney, what would you do to investigate ghost guns and also make sure that those aren't apparent in Broward County?
Yeah, so ghost guns aren't even really illegal in, or let me backtrack. Only 5 states in the country have actually taken steps to try to eliminate ghost guns. Florida is not one of them, right? And here's the problem. So federal law only requires that a serial number be placed on the actual shaft, right? And so with 3D printing, people are making a non-functioning shaft. They're selling them without the serial numbers on them, but selling them in such a way that it's very, very easy for folks to then make them functioning. And so then we've got this situation where we can have all of these guns that don't have the serial numbers, that are untraceable. We don't know where they came from. And there really isn't a lot that the state attorney can do about that, because there's no crime as far as, the manufacturing of them is concerned, because they're not technically manufacturing the full working guns without the serial numbers on them. Obviously, if someone was stupid enough to do that, we can investigate and prosecute them for that. But that's not what's happening. What we need is both a state level law and frankly a federal law that addresses that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Which is also kind of where we come in, fighting for that legislation to push for ghost guns on the state level and the federal level. But yeah, it was great talking to you, having a conversation on, gun violence in Broward County. Really looking forward to, everything in the future. But thank you so much for inviting me on.
Well, the privilege is mine, Logan. If folks want to reach you, can I drop your email in the chat now so that folks have a way to reach you?
Yeah.
If folks from your network are watching and want to reach me, I'll drop my email in there as well. As part of my platform, I have been very vocal about the need to, once as state attorney, create a community, basically a community relations board, a board of experts from around the community, experts in all different areas: mental illness, drug addiction, gun violence. And that board will have real power, not just be advisory, but will have real power affecting criminal justice policy in our county. When I'm elected and I ask you to sit on that board, will you sit on it for me?
Of course, yes.
And when I am wrong and make mistakes, will you challenge me and make sure that I know that?
Oh yeah, you already know it. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate it. For those watching, please share the video. You can check out my campaign, www.joekimok.com. Thank you so much, Logan.
Thank you. Have a nice day.